A very warm welcome to everyone. Thank you for sharing your afternoon with us for the story today titled Beautiful Deed, the Visual Poetry of Contracts. Nourishment Project is about joyous curiosity and being part of something much larger than ourselves. Here are some of the references that inform this presentation. I want to thank our curriculum collaborator, Oriental Institute of the University of Chicago, to the Gross Family Collection Trust, Toda Rabah. That, folks, is Hebrew spoken with an Indian accent. You're welcome. A contract is an agreement between private parties creating mutual obligations enforceable by law. Here is an ancient leasing contract for farmland in Egypt. The document is housed in the British Museum, and the contract for that old British museum, which is the Montague House, is rather pretty, which looks very different from the contracts we sign nowadays, big stacks of white paper, sign here, sign here, sign here, ad nauseum. This document from the Portuguese viceroy to the provincial ruler in Japan about the mistreatment of Christian missionaries in the 16th century is undeniably beautiful, but it is not a contract because it lacks what is called a consideration in legal terms. So a consideration implies that each party has to promise to provide something of value to the other. So the exchange need not be equal, but without that exchange, which is termed consideration, it is not a valid contract. There are these other conditions need also to be met. So the contract has to be acceptable by all parties. Nothing illegal needs to be going on, and both parties have to be capable. That means, you cannot do a contract with a minor or an insane person, and both parties must agree to the term. With that said, from Japan, fitting all the above requirements in a singular way, we present the Inariyama sword. It's an iron sword with 115 characters written in gold inlay on its sides. It is designated a Japanese national treasure, and the inscriptions on the sword mentions the sword's creator and how he had carved the sword's inscription as a record. So technically, I suppose the consideration here is the warrior's life itself. He pledges his own life for the honor of serving his ruler. So today's framework is twofold. The categories are going to be rights and obligations. So contracts help us really recognize the relationship, for one, between religion and law. I hope that's made clear as we move forward. And through contracts, we also notice the inheritance of humanity, these ideas of human rights, of democracy, of traditions, of social beliefs. So fundamentally, these documents evidence our social contracts with each other over time. That's my main interest in this. So we will start with rights. Last month's presentation on erotica included the story of Gilgamesh and his friend Enkidu's adventures. Gilgamesh was based in a place called Uruk. Both Uruk and Ur were powerful Sumerian cities, and the excavations in Ur have unearthed treasures. This gold necklace has a matching massive tiara of similar gold leaves. And here is another treasure from Ur. The expedition to Ur was led by the British archaeologist Leonard Woolley, and until the outbreak of World War I, Woolley had been assisted by Thomas Edward Lawrence, later better known as Lawrence of Arabia. This photograph of Woolley, he's the man with the hat and the shorts, and his assistant archaeologist Max Mallowan, husband of the best-selling author Agatha Christie. She is seated in the center. Christie often traveled to the Middle East, and she got to know Woolley through her husband's work. Her exposure to archaeology influenced many of her whodunits, most noticeably her 1936 thriller, Murder in Mesopotamia. Mesopotamia, meso meaning middle, is the land between two rivers. I'm going to point here the Tigris and the Euphrates. Soon, there was a Mesopotamian city that outshone the capital of Ur. And this new great city was Babylon. Shown here is one of the ancient wonders of the world, the Hanging Gardens of Babylon. The Babylon used to refer to their own people as Eran, Eran. And it is from there that the state now gets its name as Iran, Iran. So from ancient time to even now, there's a belief in this divine right of kings. So across the world, Egypt, here in Babylon, even Japan, technically England is a theocracy. So according to the legend, King Hammurabi, the ruler who chiefly established the greatness of Babylon, received his code of laws from Shamash, the solar deity. Hammurabi is shown in this stele, standing, his hands raised in respect, receiving the codes from Shamash. The codes are written in cuneiform script on the stele you see on the right. That's from the Oriental Institute at the University of Chicago. There's also a copy at the Louvre. So the code in the cuneiform script is carved upon a 4-ton black stone monument about 8 feet high. So it's clearly intended to be read in public. His codes are the earliest known example of a ruler proclaiming an entire body of laws arranged in orderly groups so that all men might know what is required of them. The code, which back then is effectively a contract between the ruler and his subjects, regulates the organization of society. So all heavy crimes were made punishable by death. So if a man builds a house and it was built badly, it falls and kills the owner, then the builder is to be slain. And if the owner's son was killed, then the builder's son is killed. So it was grim retaliatory punishments. So there's the consideration, the eye for an eye principle. It is the basis of these codes. If we fast forward a few centuries, the next ruler of Babylon is Nebuchadnezzar. So this is the same character that Verdi's opera Nabucco is built on. Ishtar was the goddess of war and love. And this was the dedication. There was a temple built to her. And please note the vibrant colors of the gate of the buildings of that time. We see again another contract. This is when you have stone records of a land grant made by a king to a favored person, such stone records are known as kuduru. So it's similar to the stele in form, the same stele of Hammurabi. This one depicts the Babylonian king Marduk granting land to his faithful servant Baal. The latter, Baal, is in diminished scale, barefoot, with his hands raised in a gesture of respect, very similar to the codes of Hammurabi we just saw before. So the land grant is written in cuneiform on the stone. You can see the cuneiform writing on the left. And these kudurus would be typically set up in a temple where the transactions were announced, where the initial cuneiform could be studied in case of legal issues that might arise over questions of property rights. So again, religion and law were always found together, bound. In fact, across most societies, religion is the foundation stone for their laws. It's not a coincidence that the temple, Parthenon, so resembles the highest court of our land. So religion and law, one aspires to the other. Cyrus the Great then conquers Babylon in 539 BCE. So we're just pretty much hurtling through history and brings it within the folds of his Persian Empire. Cyrus effectively ended the golden age of Chaldean rule of kings, kings like Nebuchadnezzar. Cyrus begins his reign with a declaration of reforms and respect for the religion and the political traditions of the Babylonians he has just conquered. This document is known as the Cyrus Cylinder. In it, it proclaims that the preceding king, King Nabonidus, is reprimanded and that he has been abandoned by the gods for his wickedness. By doing so, Cyrus very cleverly discredits all previous Babylonian royal authority by association. So no one is going to side up with the Babylonians anytime soon. The clay cylinder was written to be buried in the foundations of the city wall when Cyrus conquered Babylon, which was in 539. So it was deposited there. And if you recollect now the splendors of the Ishtar Gate, this cylinder was most likely decorated as beautifully. It is known by some as the world's first human rights document, since it refers to freeing people from the unfair labor work of the previous king. But that might be a stretch. I don't feel it's the first human rights document, but it's definitely an instrument of ancient Mesopotamian propaganda. In present day Fars region, we will see what is Pasargardai, which used to be Cyrus's capital. His mausoleum takes the form of a ziggurat, which is a stepped pyramid. And at the time of its discovery in the 19th century, grave robbers had stripped the tomb of all its furnishings. Archaeological study revealed that the mausoleum bricks had 5 layers of plaster paint of many geometrical shapes. So, this level of artistry further supports the assertion that the Cyrus cylinder was probably beautifully done with cuneiform writing. The Cyrus cylinder was a contract, an agreement with the new ruler with his conquered people, effectively saying, I will be just with you, and in turn, you will pay obeisance to me. So the real force of the expansion of the Persian Empire was Cyrus the Great. And at its height, Cyrus's empire, known as the Achaemenids, conquered Asia as far as the Indus River. I'm going to point, which is at the border of India here. It went all the way to Greece and North Africa, including what is now Egypt and Libya. Later, all these areas were ruled by the Greeks, starting with Alexander the Great. And so from Gandhara, which is now present day Islamabad in Pakistan, and all those areas in Afghanistan, they were all Greek controlled. This is a photograph from the old Kandahar citadel, which is in Afghanistan. These areas used to be ruled by Greece. And when the citadel, within that citadel was found an edict of an Indian emperor, Ashoka, interestingly enough, written in Greek and Prakrit. Prakrit is an Indo-Aryan language. So this is known as the Gandhara Greek Edict of Emperor Ashoka. Now, the Kandahar Greek and Aramaic edicts of Emperor Ashoka are being shown here. These two are from 260 BCE, which means before current era. The usage of Aramaic reflects the fact that Aramaic had been the official language of the Achaemenid Empire. So these edicts fall under the purview of contracts because these are Emperor Ashoka's Dhamma, which is the Buddhist pronunciation of the Indian term for Dharma, which means law. It technically means spiritual obligation, but it comes with rules of law. So these are the law decrees of Emperor Ashoka. Now, coins from that period are rather instructive. Now, study of coins is called numismatics. So each coin is effectively a contract because you're exchanging it for a good or a service. So this coin is Greek on one side, the obverse on the left, and on the reverse on the right, the script is Kharoshthi, which is an Indian script. So I marvel, imagine the practicality of having global currency representing global trade. The ancients were far more progressive than us. So we don't have currency that covers the entire globe, and we do global trade now. So Emperor Ashoka's empire covered most of India. And when he came into power, he was ruthless, ambitious, and his advisor Chanakya used to make Machiavelli look like a saint. He was cunning beyond man's belief. And during his rule, Ashoka wanted to capture, I'm going to point now, in the eastern kingdom of these areas of Kalinga, because they were major economic powerhouse because of maritime trades of copper. So the areas of Kalinga used to do copper trades with eastern lands, which we now know as Indonesia, in the Java, Indonesia, and all those areas, Burma, they used to trade for copper with them. So Ashoka conquered Kalinga, but the massive cost of life of that war, reputed to be about 300,000 people, this is in 260 BCE, completely changed him. He became an absolute pacifist and he converted to Buddhism. These are the edicts. Once he converted, this became the commitment and vision of his life. his new contract with his subjects. They were located in public places. His edicts were not in Sanskrit, the official language of the state, but in the local dialect, depending on where they were placed. So they were always printed in, well, not printed, sculpted with everyday speech as spoken by the people, hence Greek and Aramaic in the border regions. So the edicts of Ashoka are a collection of more than 30 inscriptions on pillars, as well as boulders and cave walls. 14 main edicts, starting with banning all animal sacrifices, which affirming his belief that all life, human or animal, cannot be killed in his realm. Edict 13 stated that conquest by morality was the only true conquest. And what's interesting to me also is that though Buddhism became the emperor's personal religion, it was not made the official religion. Though he had converted, his argument was for religious neutrality, so no favoritism towards any religion in government matters. Near Dhauli, which is by Bhuvaneshwar and Puri, I know some of you have been there, there's a rock inscribed with the edicts of the emperor, and the front of the rock I'm going to point is sculpted as the head and trunk and front legs of an elephant. The elephant faces east, and right below, there's the elephant. In the north facing surrounding infrastructure, which was recently built, it houses Ashoka's edicts, his commitment, his contract with his subjects that puts at its heart the welfare, the happiness, and the harmony of his people. Elephants, a symbol of royalty, is associated with the edict, making it a physically beautiful contract, I suppose. But it's a much more beautiful deed, and it has lasting power. Ashoka's rule through benevolence influenced the fourth king of Bhutan, who in 2008, at the age of 51, at the height of his popularity as an absolute monarch, he voluntarily gave away his power and instituted elective democracy. The fourth king also introduced the phrase gross national happiness, in stark contrast to the concept of gross national product. So, in clear terms, the king states that the happiness and contentment of people is paramount. That is what a ruler is for. So, the precedent of this 2008 rule in Bhutan are the edicts of Ashoka from nearly 2,300 years ago. So, Ashoka's contract with his people, I'd say, I feel at least, is the world's first human rights document. Actually, more aptly, it would be the right of all living beings, not just human rights. And it precedes the document that was just released on January 11th, last month, by Prince Charles. It is the Terra Carta, the financial sector commitment for our planet, the fundamental rights of nature, hoping to be protected. Here is the best inheritance of humanity, the idea of kinship of all beings. So here's a chronological summary. So what we have covered so far is everything BCE. So our current era starts 0 onwards. So we've covered all the way up to Ashoka Edict. Rome will now bring us into our current era. So all this is CE, current era. So we've been really hitting the histories. Hope you've enjoyed it. 7 separate hill settlements joined together to make up Rome. The founder Romulus had selected 100 men to form the Roman Senate to govern the newly formed city. These men were called patres, meaning fathers, and their descendants formed the patrician class. Only they were allowed to hold political and religious offices. Again, we see the connection between religion and law. The common people were called plebeians. Around 455 BCE, before current era, there was a perennial struggle for legal, social protection, and civil rights between the privileged class, the patricians, and the common people, the plebeians. And this led to the formulation of what is known as the 12 tables, duodecim tabularum. They were etched on 12 bronze tablets displayed in the Roman Forum for everyone to view. So, before these codified rules, it is believed that the Roman law was rooted in Etruscan religion that emphasized rituals. So, the ongoing connection of religion and law being made evident through contracts. Political theorists such as James Madison have highlighted the importance of the 12 tables in crafting the United States Bill of Rights. Here comes inheritance for us hundreds of years ago. We are just a part of the continuation. I think it's so wonderful. From the 12 tables, which was circa about 439 BCE, we leap almost 1,000 years to 529 CE, current era. This is Basilica di San Vitale in Ravenna, Italy, which is associated with Emperor Justinian I. His legal codes, Corpus Juris Civilis, clarified and updated those old Roman laws. And so what they did effectively was eradicated any inconsistencies and sped up a lot of the legal processes. So it affected all manners of topics like punishments, marriage, inheritance. And these Justinian codes were effective in the Byzantine Empire until mid 15th century. So they lasted about 1,000 years. It served as a basis for legal practice in continental Europe, as well as in Ethiopia, because Ethiopia used to be a colony of Italy, and most former colonies of European nations, including Latin America. This is just for fun. For a long time, because we're now going to talk a little bit about the pre Julius Caesar time, Rome and Gaul were the main fights. So modern France was in conflict, and Asterix and Obelix are delightful comics to catch this a view of this period. Honestly, I learned a lot of my history through comic books, and they're really very, very witty. So once Rome captures Egypt around 31 BC with the death of Cleopatra VII, the wealth of the Nile makes Rome an empire of repute, massively wealthy. The Romans in Rome have money for conspicuous consumption, so silk and all those other luxuries. And this is what fuels the proverbial Silk Roads. It is good to be a Roman. And in the Roman state, only the Roman citizens had full civil and political rights. The Roman private laws, including the laws of inheritance, only applied to citizens. So citizenship was very, very valuable. One method of obtaining citizenship was through a minimum of 25 years of military service. The military diploma, thereby, is a contract. So the consideration is an exchange of service for citizenship. At the end of a 25 years of service, the retiring soldier and all his children were awarded Roman citizenship. This was a folding bronze tablet engraved with the details of the soldier's service records, which he would then use to prove his citizenship. And the tables would have been bound and sealed together with a backup copy in the middle. So I hope you can see. So this red line is what I put in to mark the wires. So this would be the outer bottom copy. Here's the interior copy of the same document. The interior copies of the witnesses with an outer copy. So they will be stacked together. So the two interiors are here and the outer copies are here. So they're all being stacked together like this. And that is what I'm trying to show on this last picture, stacking all these four bronze tablets together. Through these holes, a wire would put together and they would tie it up. Once the wire was tied, so it's held tightly, they would seal it with a wax. They would pour wax over it, and then they would have 7 citizens bearing witness. So that's one of the privileges of being a citizen in the Roman times. You could bear witness. Once it was sealed, it was covered with a metal plate, and so it was protected. So an example of that is shown here. As you can see, well, I'm going to point again. This line you see here is because the wire from the bottom of this covered it up. And so these markers show the metal box that would have covered the 7 seals. So this is the outer end, the top of the witness signs, the middle of what the soldier's service was, a copy, this is once again on the inside of the witness names, and the copy on the outside of what the soldier had done. So these tablets would have been polished, dazzling bronze. And here is an example of the dazzle of polished bronze. The Leon tablet is a speech transcript of the Roman Emperor Claudius's proposal to allow moneyed landed citizens from further Gaul to enter the senatorial class, and so to later perhaps enter the Senate itself once they reach a necessary level of wealth. So money and politics have always been friends. So imagine these bronze edicts, these diplomas, and the previous 12 tablets glistening like this in the sun, in the center of Rome at the Tabularium, which was the official records office situated within the Roman Forum. I marked it with this red spot here. So it was smack dab in the center of Rome, and here would be the 7 hills that formulated Rome altogether. Areas that would now be where the Vittorio Emanuele monument is. It's known as that wedding cake of a monument. Whoever's been to Rome, I'm betting you've been stuck in that horrific traffic in front of it. There's no way. It just keeps circling round and round and round. Back then, there was the temple of Juno there. And this is where the bronze tablets would be displayed, just sparkling, heralding the majesty of law. In fact, this is probably where the 12 edicts, the 12 tablets would have been posted so that the public would know what is their right. But isn't it curious and just funny? Law being displayed in a temple. Same as the kuduru during the Babylonian times. The kuduru is those stone steles that were the land grants given by the king Marduk to his favorite servant Bel. Same concept, religion and law constantly go together. And if you move forward to the 10th century, the religion and law still keep the partnership. This charter given by Emperor Otto I for a monastery. And the details really fascinate. So the pictorial invocation, the symbol of Christ in the form of a decorated sea, I'm going to point to it right here on the top. So that opens the diploma. Elsewhere, that decorated sea might take the form of a cross or the Greek letters Chi Rho, which represents Christ. The seal shown here is a very important wax impression of the mark, name, and title of the ruler, because you need to give the diploma authority. The seal is attached directly to the diploma or sometimes via a strip of parchment on the bottom. Some contracts will come with a sancteo, which is a warning about the consequences for those who disregard the charter. It may also come with a blessing for those who assisted the charter's enactment. They are promised spiritual reward. So there's the consideration. You help me get this into power, I will give you something or I will punish you. Sometimes, instead of a signature, there might be a subscription or a monogram or the name written out. But most of them will have some level of promulgation that goes along the lines of, let it be known, such and such and such. It'll tell you what the charter is about. So we move forward a century or two, and we now come to England, from Germany to England. And here is King John, brother of the Crusader Richard the Lionhearted. Now, John was no saint. And according to the chronicles of Margam Abbey, he most likely killed his nephew, Arthur of Brittany, to come into power. John was tyrannical. He raised taxes. He lost tons of areas of lands to France that England used to own before. And he was excommunicated by the Pope. So there was, even though, isn't it funny that his brother, Richard the Lionhearted, fought the crusade, so he had taken the Crusaders' vow. England now is no longer part of the Catholic world because Catholicism, the Catholic Church, was immensely powerful. That meant, because he had been excommunicated, that meant for 6 years, from 1209 to 1214, the faithful in England were denied sacraments and the dead were refused Christian burial. But King John didn't care because he was happy to get the wealth of the church under his control, and he taxed his clergy. And after a while, the nobility rose up against him because of his unfair taxation. And on June 15th, in 1215, so 1215 CE, King John was forced to accept the terms of the Charter of Runnymede, which is now known as the Magna Carta. So the original Magna Carta documents, which were drawn up for distribution across the kingdom, were authenticated with the Great Seal. So they were not done with the signature of the king. Of the original Magna Carta manuscripts, only four survive. There are two copies of the Magna Carta at the British Library, and the others at the Lincoln Cathedral and Salisbury Cathedral. So it was only once when all four Magna Cartas were brought together. It happened about a few years ago. And you can easily tell they all do not look the same at all. One is in a landscape format, one is definitely burned. So the British Library copies came from the vast private library of Sir Robert Cotton. One was damaged in the Cotton Fire in 1731. And subsequently, in the 19th century, the restoration techniques that they used have rendered the text just about very difficult to see. And in 2014, when all those four Carters came together, the conservation scientists in the British Library were able to use multispectral imaging to view parts of the text which haven't been properly seen for nearly 200 years. So, in this fire beaten document, in this section, you could make out what it had said. Now, though the seal of King John was damaged, this is what it would have looked like. The early 13th century, charters were normally sealed with the Great Seal in either red or perhaps green. The less important documents got a white seal. The other British copy from the library is again from Sir Robert Cotton's collection, and this is the only one of the four documents that is in landscape format. The three holes in the triangular arrangement at the bottom of the Lincoln Cathedral Magna Carta is where the seal would have been appended. And an interesting side story, to encourage the American public to support Britain during World War II, this Lincoln Cathedral Magna Carta had been exhibited at the New York World Fair. Can you imagine if somebody stole it? That would have been something. So the Salisbury Cathedral copy is the only existing Magna Carta written in a different style of handwriting. So, in the world of contracts, especially manuscripts, handwriting matters. The style of handwriting used for the Salisbury Cathedral's Magna Carta is called textualis. That hand is very different from the diplomatic hand used on the other copies. And there are some who believe it was written later by the Salisbury church scribe instead of by the people at the chancery, which was the king's centralized office of scribes. And what they do is they point to these rather distinctive textualis hands in other documents from the Salisbury Cathedral that match the Magna Carta. So, for example, the G in this document matches the G from a document from the Salisbury scribes. Same as the IIS, it matches the IIS on the Magna Carta document. The W's look the same. And all that it means is that perhaps some scribe at the Salisbury Cathedral had copied the Magna Carta down, then the document had been sent over to the king to have it officially sealed. So it's still a valid, important document. What is being debated is the time. Is it from the same period? Is it off by a year? But it's still a valuable document. What's even more interesting to me, at least, is that one often forgets in the 13th century, English hadn't completely, fully developed as a language. And many of the nobility, the barons who forced King John to sign the document, they only spoke French. In fact, many of the kings of England during those times didn't speak English. And so the charter was made available in French as well. But King John is an interesting beast. 2 months after the charter was issued, to get out of the agreement, John got back together with the Catholic Church and had Pope Innocent III declare the Magna Carta contract null and void. To make a long story short, King John died soon after, and his successor accepted and expanded the charter. So here is the papal bull annulling the Magna Carta. So the papal bull just means Vatican documents that have been authenticized by the Vatican seal. It is named after that leaden seal, a bulla, that is traditionally appended to the end of Vatican documents to authenticate any documentation from the Vaticans. The Byzantine emperors had a golden seal, a bulla aurea, and that term came to be applied to the entire decree. So, for example, the golden bull from King Bela IV of Hungary to the people of Gradec, which is now Zagreb in Croatia. And what that um, golden bull did is it proclaimed Gradec as a royal free city. This allowed privileges of building fortified urban settlements, as these urban settlements were the only viable holdouts during the war against the Mongols. Let's not forget the bigger context, because during the five crusades, the Mongol Empire was expanding. What we call the European Dark Ages, it wasn't dark on the east side at all. So the Mongol Empire is the largest land empire in the world. It's bigger than the British Empire. It eclipses the Roman Empire. And though it's not the focus of our discussion on contracts today, it's very important to point out that contracts under the Mongol rule were absolutely multilingual. Look at the empire they cover. Mongol scribes were required to be fluent in multiple languages. Contracts say so much about the times and cultures. So if we leap forward to a times, after the Church of England has been established and Elizabeth I is in power, here is a request for a charter to start a grammar school to protect the youth from, I'm just going to read to you, given over to wickedness and vices such as swearing, drunkenness, whoredom, idleness, and such like. Can you imagine a vision statement like that for a school? I mean, I should use a vision statement like that for the nourishment projects. We will prevent you from committing the 7 deadly sins by supplying you with 10 new ones. Sign up. Could you imagine a vision statement like that? I'll tell my marketing team. So, anyway, Elizabeth granted the charter, and the beautiful iconography is quite revealing. The crown over the red and white roses, it symbolizes the Tudors and the Yorks. The crown over the harp is to represent Ireland. And it's quite telling. Despite having lost French lands by 1558, this 1585 charter depicts the crown over the very French fleur-de-lis. Here again, right in the upper corner, you see Elizabeth, and there's the fleur-de-lis with the crown over it. I don't know, was she planning to go and attack France again? Who knows, but there's the charter. Elizabeth had granted a charter to Sir Walter Raleigh to explore the New World. Actually, in reality, what she wanted to do is to have him harass the Spanish ships, because Spain was a huge empire, and to mine the New World for gold and silver and Christianize Indians. Well, Raleigh was later imprisoned by Elizabeth's successor, James I, and years later, James eventually pardoned him. And the pardon document itself is arresting. Look at it. It's a remarkable seal. And speaking of Raleigh, now the city in North Carolina that is named after Sir Walter Raleigh, this is the charter given by Charles II for his friends who had helped put him into power. So this is the charter for the Carolinas, state up east and north of us, or south of us. The charter granted the colonists the rights to assemble, ownership and disposal of property, and the establishment of courts, and for religious tolerance. The one charter that interests me greatly is this beauty, given by William the Orange and his wife Mary II, to establish the British East India Company. The company was granted a monopoly on all English trade east of the Cape of Good Hope. History shows what that British East India Company ended up succeeding doing in India. So, as far as I'm concerned, I find this document to be a dirty, pretty thing. Now, from rights, we move on to obligation. So, ancient Egypt was an enormously powerful empire, and Egyptians routinely married princesses from other areas, but they did not allow other kings to marry Egyptian royal women. Some Babylonian rulers complained, but that fell on deaf ears, as is documented in the Amarna archives. Now, these are cuneiform diplomatic correspondence from around 1300 BCE, and along with cuneiform, Egyptian documentation is associated with papyrus. And only about 3% of the population were literate. And papyri were often erased and reused, and the old strips could be layered with plaster as cartonnage, so they used them for mummy masks. A scribe would have owned a writing palette like this one, which provides space for two colors of ink and had a slot for reed brushes. So they used brushes, not pen, for writing on papyri. Among other things documented on papyrus were annuity documents, which are effectively Egyptian prenups. The prenups had multiple witness signatures in the back, which is shown in this box right here. So you needed signature to verify the document. And these marriage contracts were sometimes 8 feet long. Divorce was common in Egypt, and at a time of a divorce, a third of the property and any wealth gained after the marriage had to be given to the woman. Egyptian women had the right to inherit, bequeath, own land, and operate her own business. Now, Egypt is interesting for many, many reasons, not the least of which is that in the early 10th century, mid 10th century, 969, the Fatimid dynasty conquered Egypt and built the capital city, El Medina al Kahira, the city victorious, which is now known as Cairo. So even though the Fatimid dynasty won, they ruled under the name the Abbasid Caliphate. So as the capital of the empire, the city Cairo was full of administrators. And in the late 10th century, that is the beginning of the Crusades, and until the formation of the State of Israel, a vast majority, almost 90% of the Jewish population lived under Islamic rule. So religious documents weren't thrown away, and they were kept in the storeroom in the synagogues, which is known as the Geniza. Cairo's Ben Ezra Synagogue was where, over the centuries, so from the 10th century all the way to the 1800s and onwards, everybody started storing all documents, not just religious ones, in this Geniza. So centuries of documents, texts with Hebrew and Arabic scripts overlapping, tax scripts, land management deals, scribbles, and things that have got nothing to do with Jewish life, all of it was stored in this Geniza, which is in the Ben Erza synagogue in Cairo. This is known as the Cairo Geniza. In context, a palimpsest is when you have a piece of writing material on which later writing has been superimposed. So I'm going to point, here was the original writing, and for whatever reason, they used that paper, it could be linen paper, parchment, whatever, and they wrote on top of it. In the late 19th century, these two women on the left, they were from Cambridge. They were Greek scholars. They came across what is called a hexapla palimpsest. So hexapla is a Greek, it's a Hebrew Bible translated into Greek. So they had been to Cairo, and around that time, the Ben Ezra synagogue was having infrastructure improvements. And so some of the documents ended up being for sale, and they bought some because they saw the Greek writing underneath, because they were interested in the study of Greek. When they went back to Cambridge, they showed their colleague, a Solomon Schechter, like, look what we found. Look, it has Greek writings, but look at this hexapla palimpsest stuff. Schechter got curious. He went to Egypt. He negotiated with the chief Egyptian rabbi and brought back lots of documents to Cambridge, centuries of data, documents disintegrated, small pieces of paper, paper mixed together like jigsaw puzzles, except that it was thousands and thousands and thousands of pieces of jigsaw puzzles from hundreds of jigsaw sets. So here is Schechter sitting with his treasure, and there are probably thousands of contracts in there. So the majority of the documents are in Cambridge University, Some are in Oxford, and a few other institutions around the world share the rest of it. The Cairo Geniza now is practically empty of these documents anyway. A lot of it has been digitized. Here is an intact example of a digitized version. So now what they're doing to piece the documents together, or at least to put a document together in general, the computer's recognition algorithm is being used to make matches. Many are false matches, but some are not, such as this one, half a piece of a contract document from Cambridge University, which is shown on the left, was matched with a piece from Oxford University, shown on the right. And for those of you who might be interested, you can really sign up. It's free. You can sign up and get an account with the Friedberg Geniza project. I did. And so you can look at all these if you want, because I just wanted to get actual pictures from them. And it's amazing how well it's documented. So it turns out that this contract is part of what is called a ketubah, a Jewish marriage contract. So in ancient Jewish tradition, men paid an upfront bride price to marry, money for the security for the wife in the future. Since mainly wealthier older men could afford to pay the bride price, getting married became difficult for younger men. So an adjustment was made. The Jewish marriage contract, the ketubah, is made by the bridegroom committing wealth for the protection of the bride. So instead of paying upfront, they commit to a future payment. So this allowed the young men to get married. Here is a complete ketubah from the Cairo Geniza. So ketubah, the plural is ketubot, are legal in Israel. It's effectively symbolic everywhere else. The main text starts with things like, on this day, so-and-so is marrying so-and-so. I want to stress these are not art objects, but rather do view them as documents of Jewish culture. So they are social contracts in the truest sense. So let's look at some. I want to thank again the Gross Family Collection Trust for being so generous with these treasures. I was charmed by them. So the text, I'm going to point, the text around the edges of this ketubah is from Proverb 31 from the book of Proverbs, which says, a woman of valor is precious beyond rubies. So it reminded me of Renee Zellweger's movie, A Price Above Rubies, that a woman's character is more valuable than her looks and her wealth. Interestingly enough, per the Jewish tradition, no human depiction is being shown on this ketubah. So nature is represented, it's representing actually abundance and fertility, the signs of a family to come. From Cochin, India. So the vibrant colors, red and gold, are the marriage colors in India. So how appropriate it's the color of a ketubah. It also reminded me of the cotton prints of my childhood summer dress. And as I looked carefully at it, this term, I think the Jewish term hidor mitzvah, which is the Jewish commandment to beautify. So I've tried to show, and once again, do forgive me if the pronunciation is wrong. Well, it will be wrong, but here goes. Hidor mitzvah says to beautify, and the scribe did precisely that. So this Jewish scribe in India, this is the symbol for Yud, which is the symbol for God. And he or she writes it with a flourish. You see that? You see the same sign here and here. So every time it's being written Yud, he beautifies it. Hidor mitzvahs it. I just thought it was so sweet to find these details. This one is from my birthplace, Calcutta. So it's bursting with symbolism. I'm going to point to it. The doves here symbolizing shalom, peace for the married home. Fish, symbol of plenty, but as this is Calcutta, a port city filled with Bengalis like me who love to eat fish, it also might be a regional symbol. The grapes here symbolize the bounty of Israel, and everything below the grape is a sign for plenty. So the sheaves of wheat symbolize plenty again. And it was also referring to a Joseph's dream. Here we have the Lion of Judea. And look, the flags, it has, I counted 12, I suppose, representing the 12 tribes of Israel. There is the Star of David, the Ten Commandments, the menorah, the oil for the anointment. And then I researched, and then these two signs here, these fire and the smoke, it is probably the symbolism for the God leading his people with the smoke signs during the day and the fire at night. This is no mere art. I just loved seeing these. A more obvious iconography of India, this is again from India, is the peacock. And I marveled at these chains on the bottom. So I asked my mother yesterday, sorry, what do you think these chains are for? She must have been in a gnarly mood with my father because she said, most Indian women, Shoma, view a marriage document as a work contract. Of course, it should have chains on it. I was like, all righty, Papa must have pissed you off. Thank you. So if we move forward, this one I found so interesting. This is from Morocco, and the Torah scrolls in a synagogue, I believe, are stored in an ark, which is a room. So if this were to represent a synagogue, I thought it was so clever that it's what it's showing beautifully is that the ketubah itself is stored in an ark, like a Torah would be stored. I could be dead wrong in this. And what I didn't know, first I thought this was the huppah, that canopy under which the Jewish people get married. But then someone told me, no, 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 no. That's a sign for lekayam, if I'm saying it right, which is a celebration to life. So what the ketubah is doing is just celebrating. That's wonderful. This one, interestingly, has signatures also, because, oddly or sadly, not all the ketubahs are signed. Nothing sad about this one. This is from the Yale Library, and this ketubah is bursting with joy. So the framing text, so do remember, these are all contracts. These are marriage contracts. Look how beautiful they are. So the framing text for this ketubah has two popular sayings from those times, and these are the 19th century. One loosely translates like with good sign and good luck. And the other says something to the effect of one who finds a wife finds goodness. And what I found brilliant is in between these two, I don't know, proverbs or adages, the filler words were synonyms for joy. So they had joy just festooned all around the ketubah. And the bottom 5 boxes are for the signatures of the witnesses. And I believe you read across these boxes. And if you did, it is said, I believe it says, I will rejoice in the Lord and my soul will be glad. Everything about this is about joy and happiness and a celebration. And the vase full of roses, I'm assuming these are roses, but Afghanistan is famous for roses. The vase itself, it is a motif that travels across India, which at that time in the 19th century included Pakistan and borderlines of Afghanistan, because you see this same looking vase throughout Mughal architecture, and it probably originally came from Persia. Isn't it marvelous how these ketubas reflect the culture and the world that they inhabit? It's so fun. Most likely my favorite, no human figures, and plants and animals iconography meant to evoke plenty. And below the 2 lions of Judah, inside this circle are a blessing. And I found out, and I was just so grateful to find these things out, that it includes a part from the Song of Songs in Hebrew. And I believe it goes, Ani ledodi vadodi li. Again, Indian, Hebrew with an Indian accent. But I believe what it's saying is, I am my beloved's, my beloved is mine. It is so utterly beautiful. Were I to draw a ketubah, it would simply say, I am my beloved. Because in deep love, 2 merges into 1. Nothing further needed. In terms of the Japanese garden, no ma. The Jewish traditions don't depict human figures. This one certainly does, and they're naked to boot. Obviously, Adam and Eve. And the cartouches have a lot of biblical symbols. And the cartouche on the bottom, I'm going to point to it now. So this is obviously the snake with the apple and the tree of knowledge. This, I believe, is the tree of life. And I'm not quite sure, but I think that the two symbols here are probably symbols from the Jewish Kabbalah, the Jewish mysticism. But I could be very wrong about this one. Ah, this ketubah is from a very wealthy family from Turkey. And on the bottom, these little homes you see, I'll try to zoom in. These represent the homes that were on the Golden Horn on the Bosphorus in Turkey, because that's where they were formed. So it's representing their life. And I find this picture just emanates a very European idea of wealth. Massive amounts of gold just decorate this ketubah, and the rays of divine light emanating from the heart. It's very European looking to me, and it's still a beautiful one. What I found very cool about this, in though, is look again. I'm going to try to scroll in. What is this thing showing up? Hopefully, it'll go away. They didn't have signatures; they had signets. I guess the people were so wealthy, they ordered matching signets for the bride and groom to put onto the document. Isn't that so sweet? I love finding these little details. Make my day. So from Iran, so whenever you see any ketubas that, not ketubas, sorry, ketubot, that's the right plural, that look like this. So here's the line of Judea and the Shamesh, which is the sun. So many Iranian ketubot look like this, and they'll have these cypress trees, very telling. So Shamesh is the sun in Hebrew. Shamsa is the sun that illuminates the all the Islamic illuminated manuscripts. They open with a Shamsa, which is again a sun. I just like the etymology of all of this. And I believe Shimson is the term for Samson. So he's associated with the sun. And Delilah, I believe Lila means night. So the sun, the night, and the day. I love it when things start fitting together in my little noggin. They could be all wrong, but they make sense to me. So Hidor mitzvah again in the form of paper cutting to decorate this. Except this is not paper. I believe from the notes that I got from William Gross, this is vellum. Vellum is very expensive. It's parchment, veal skin. What it's also quite telling, I hope you can see, yeah, there we go. I hope you can see, because it's from Lebanon, the Islamic style crescents on top of the decoration of this ketubah. And speaking of cutout borders, vellum again, obviously a very wealthy bridegroom. So we have, I suppose, David, King David. There is Solomon holding the scales of justice in his hand. And there is within the heart Moses with the 10 Commandments. Here again is the oil for the anointment. Adam and Eve. These older ketubot are so religious minded, but they are marvelously done. And is it fitting? Yeah. There is Samson with a fresh haircut pulling down the temple. Look at him. He's mighty. But as far as cut ups of vellum and just striking in composition and full of meaning, another one again from Italy. What happened here? Sorry. Huh. Green ink on vellum. The document is scalloped at the top with a floral border in cutout lace-like design. I cannot imagine how they made this. So this is, it's a beautiful document, but it's very odd to me how it's full of biblical violence. So we have Judith with the head of Holofernes, and the other end, I believe this is one of the crown of the Torah, the Keters, Keter. I don't quite know if I'm pronouncing it correctly, but it's the crown, Keter of the Torah, Keter of the priesthood. Moving on, this is David with the head of Goliath. I mean, the work is just leaves one speechless. Vellum and is beautifully done. Now to show one that is truly singular. I love this. Look, it has a photograph of the bride and groom. And it looks like it was drawn. I'm really hoping that the groom drew this full of love. Look how sweet it is. It's something my son would draw. It would be lovely if he drew one for his bride. When I looked at the details, look, there's a hand. It is so sweet. And I was cooing over it till I grew to find out just yesterday. A friend of mine, many of you know her, she showed me a ring with the exact same symbolism, but it has a marvelous meaning in it because the hands open up to reveal a box, and one can open the box. And this came from a small village in Toledo, Spain, because there was a Jewish community there before they had to be moved out because of the Crusades. What one did was keep a tiny bit of the ketubah in here so you could carry it with you. Isn't that just so beautiful a thing to do? And what I loved is that my friend Diane, she taught me something that I'm lucky enough to be shared with you, because that's the heart of the Nourishment Project, peer-to-peer learning. So thank you, Diane. And now an introduction to someone, the mere thought of whom makes me grin like a moron. William Gross, who was generous enough to trust me with his documents. Thank you, William. I have enjoyed discovering these fabulous traditions of yours. And if you would please unmute yourself, what would you have us learn about your documents?
As with every time I hear you speak, Shoma, I learn new things. For instance, we all have these legends with which we live. And I, until this moment, was convinced that the Jewish marriage contract, the ketubah, was the first marriage document which preserved the rights of woman, of the bride. And now I learned from you that it really took place in Egypt before that, and that there are the documents giving that. That's wonderful. It's really terrific. Anyway, we do have ketubot that go all the way back 2,000 years that are among the documents that were found at the Dead Sea and in the caves around that area. Um, the in uh, but the decoration of ketubot was almost entirely from Islamic countries.
Yes, they
Um,
have Nikanama, the
yeah,
Nikanama
yeah.
documents. Yes.
And the European countries, you very, very few examples. And usually it was because there were Sephardic communities whose origin was in the Islamic countries, who had come into those areas, and so they brought it with them. There probably is no. You saw the two Italian ketubot which you showed, and the Italian two-boat are, of course, the most spectacular, the most beautiful, um, because Italy was a place of relative tolerance, and Jewish communities were able to stay in place and to become wealthier. They really weren't chased out quite as often as in other places. And that shows itself even in the documents that they made. I'm very much with you, Showman, trying to get the contextual, sociological aspects of these things, how it relates to the communities that they are in. Um, the Jewish wedding has always been a favorite um, subject of mine. I have some 330 ketubot in my collection. Many of them are printed. And by the way, the one with the naked figure of Adam and Eve, that is a printed ketubah,
Oh,
not
wow.
a, yeah, not drawn and
Oh,
not
thank you.
painted.
Ah,
And it's there, we know maybe we have three copies that have survived from the 17th century
oh, wow.
of, yeah, no, it's an incredible
Thank you
piece.
for correcting it. I love it when I'm corrected. Yes.
No, no, how would you know? I mean, it's not anything that you could expect it to know. I just I adore the ketubah because I think that the wedding in my own life, it was most certainly a major one, a major event. And I would tell you that in the 21st of June of this year, we will be celebrating our 60th wedding
Oh,
anniversary.
congratulations. Well, congratulations.
So, and I still have ours. The ketubah, by the way, I saw somebody asked a question about where was it kept, and it belongs to the woman. This is her legal document for protection. So it was absolutely hers. It She took care of it. She wherever she wished to hide it, she would, or hold it. In Iraq, they had a custom where the two boats were folded, put into a textile envelope, and she would sleep with it under her pillow. So purely a woman's document. It had no right with anybody else. Um, it's and of course the ones that I was so interested in sending to you, Shoma, were the three Indian
Yeah,
ketubot that I have, particularly the one from Cochin,
yeah,
which is just so completely Indian in
yeah.
its and beautifully so. It's really a very delicately painted document. And so I would ask, does anybody have any other questions that somebody would like to
I
ask?
will stop
Which,
the sharing so I can open it up. So thank you, William. I'm going to end this now so then I can stop the sharing and then they can ask questions directly.
sure.
And the one coming up in 2 weeks' time is the Islamic Gardens, The Sound of a Garden. It's all poetry. And then a month from now, it is Around the World in 80 Birds. I hope you will
Oh,
consider joining us. And as always, thank you for your time, and I wish you joy.